Western media report that Ukraine no longer counts on a quick end to the war, but is preparing for a long-term struggle. The war will last a long time. So, what are the most likely scenarios for ending the war now? We'll talk about this next in our program. This is TSN.ua News with you. I'm Alina Turchin. Subscribe to our channel and give us a like. And now, let's get to the main story. Renowned Ukrainian journalist and publicist Vitaly Portnikov has presented his own vision of possible ways the full-scale war in Ukraine could end, outlining 4 key scenarios. In his analysis, published on his YouTube channel, he examined each of them in detail, assessing their likelihood and the potential consequences for Ukrainian statehood. The first scenario is the preservation of Ukraine on 75 to 80% of its territory. The second is a pro-Russian statehood. The third is the complete occupation of the country and loss of statehood. And the fourth is Russia's defeat. According to Portnikov, the most likely scenario for now is the second one, a pro-Russian Ukraine. Let's talk about each of them in more detail. The first scenario is the preservation of a viable state. In Portnikov's opinion, this scenario is 30% realistic and assumes a quick end to the conflict, which would allow Ukraine to retain a more or less functional state with a population of 25 to 30 million people, controlling 75 to 80% of its territory. In this case, Ukraine will be negotiating its accession to the European Union for 10 to 15 years. Portnikov notes that it remains unclear how these negotiations will end, given the territorial issues. He suggests that by the time the negotiations are concluded, the border may be settled with the involvement of the West, Ukraine, and Russia, possibly following the Korean scenario, where the line of contact is recognized by European Union countries as their border, similar to the situation in Cyprus. In such a situation, Ukraine will not join NATO, but it may become a partner country of the alliance with special relations with most member states. Although the format of these relations is currently completely unclear. The second scenario is a pro-Russian Ukraine. Portnikov currently considers this option the most likely, estimating its probability at 40%. It envisions a neutral status for Ukraine and the withdrawal of troops from the entire territory of Donetsk, Luhansk, and Kherson regions. The line of contact that will be formed will not be perceived as such, but will become a de facto border, though not de jure. There will be no troops in this area, and it will function as a buffer zone between Ukraine and Russia, where some nominally non-pro-European peacekeepers will be stationed. According to Portnikov, under such a scenario, a pro-Russian government will be formed in Ukraine, democratically elected, but in essence similar to the government of Georgian Dream. Such a government would recognize Ukraine's territorial integrity, but would claim that its predecessors were incompetent, which led to the loss of regions. It would also emphasize the need to coexist with Russia as a large neighboring nuclear power, as well as the importance of taking into account the interests of the Russian-speaking population and their religious sentiments. The goal of such a government would be peaceful coexistence, avoiding further missile strikes, and NATO membership would be rolled out. At the same time, negotiations regarding the European Union would be conducted in such a way as to effectively avoid membership. Meanwhile, Ukraine would not join the Eurasian Union, but would maintain economic relations through countries like Kazakhstan or even Belarus, allowing Russian businesses to control a significant part of the Ukrainian economy. The third scenario is the complete occupation of Ukraine. According to Portnikov, this option has a 20% chance of being realized. It aligns with Vladimir Putin's wishes and could be carried out following the Syrian-Chechen model. This scenario envisions the collapse of the front and the complete occupation of Ukraine, even without the need to deploy a large number of troops, since the population loses the will to resist. A puppet government is established in Kiev and a blitzkrieg plan is put into action. The eastern and southern regions of Ukraine hold referendums on joining the Russian Federation. The central and western parts of the country remain a puppet state within the so-called Union State of Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine, which has long been the aggressor's plan. The fourth scenario is Russia's failure. According to Portnikov, this scenario is the best for Ukraine, but has the lowest probability of coming true, only 10%. It involves a systemic collapse in Russia. Its economy falls apart, and it loses the ability to defend its assets. The Russian army proves incapable of defending the occupied territories. And in this situation, the Ukrainian army drives the Russians out of the occupied lands without much trouble. The West, for its part, forces Kiev and Moscow to sign a peace agreement. According to this agreement, Moscow effectively recognizes Ukraine's control over all internationally recognized territory, but formally continues to consider Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, Zaporizhzhia regions, and the Autonomous Republic of Crimea as an inseparable part of Russia, occupied by Ukraine. At the same time, Russia does not fight for these territories until better times. In this case, Ukraine can quite calmly become a full-fledged member of NATO and the European Union. This pessimistic forecast contrasts with the dynamics of international relations. In particular, the Times notes a shift in Donald Trump's rhetoric toward Vladimir Putin, which is becoming much tougher, pointing to a possible end to the romance between the two leaders. The article points out that the rhetoric of the U.S. leader toward the Russian dictator has become much harsher. Instead of previous compliments or neutral statements, Trump now openly declares that Putin simply wants to kill people. It is noted that Trump, who previously prided himself on his excellent relationship with Putin and spent hours talking to him on the phone, is now expressing disappointment. He notes that he was unable to use this relationship to achieve a peace agreement or even a ceasefire in Ukraine. The article's headline is "The End of the Romance." It suggests that the period of exceptionally close relations between the leaders, which was observed earlier, may be coming to an end or has already ended. This is because, according to Trump, Putin wants to go all the way and just keep killing people, which does not sit well with the American politician. At the same time, former Ukrainian Defense Minister Alexei Reznikov categorically states that there will be no peace in Ukraine until Vladimir Putin dies or resigns. He said this in an interview with the Times. He emphasized that the subjugation of Ukraine is a personal obsession of the Russian dictator, so the conflict will continue in one form or another as long as Putin remains in the Kremlin. In Reznikov's opinion, even if a ceasefire is declared and buffer zones are established, Russia will continue to attack Ukraine using hybrid methods, just as it did before 2022. Alexei Reznikov believes that the Russian regime is afraid of Ukraine because Ukraine's democratic and European path poses a direct threat to its survival. In his opinion, if the Russian population realizes the advantages of democracy over tyranny, it will call into question the existence of the current leadership. That is why Reznikov is convinced that only after a change of leadership in Russia will there be a real chance for normal, peaceful coexistence between Ukrainians and Russians. According to Reznikov, Putin seeks to subjugate Ukraine by using a salami tactic, slicing off small pieces bit by bit in order to eventually consume all of Ukraine. He noted that this process began with Crimea, then continued in Luhansk and Donetsk regions, and today includes the occupation of parts of Kherson and Zaporizhzhia regions. Reznikov emphasized that Russia's advance will continue as long as it is allowed to do so. He also admitted that at the beginning of the full-scale Russian invasion, he mistakenly believed that there was a certain threshold of loss after which Vladimir Putin would abandon his goals. Reznikov assumed that Russia would stop after losing 100,000 troops, drawing parallels with the war in Afghanistan, where the Soviet Union withdrew its forces after losing 18,000 soldiers. However, according to him, this assessment turned out to be naive. And what do you think? Which of these scenarios is the most likely and why? Share your thoughts and predictions in the comments below this video. Stay with TSN.ua to keep up with the most important events. See you in the next episodes.